What does it really mean to feel at home? The answer to that question isn't so simple in a region growing this quickly. You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. On this Thursday, December 18th, 2025 episode, we're sharing a conversation I moderated during a live event in Orlando, where we explored how rapid growth is shaping our sense of home, identity, and belonging in Central Florida, and what's at stake if people feel left out. During the discussion last week at our studio on East Colonial Drive, we heard from local voices and reflected on personal experiences. We opened our conversation with a reflection of belonging, a poem written and delivered by Orlando Poet Laureate Sean Welcome. Here's a moment from that piece.
ESOL, English for speakers of other languages. It's the classroom in public schools you might qualify for if you have an accent for a fluent transition into the fluent majority. Besides the poetry, I'm a tutor at Wekiva High School, which is like the mall cop of teachers, badge, no gun, no license to run anything, but I pace myself anyway. Within my first few days as a tutor, Atlan says to me, "Do you speak Creole? You look like Wyclef." I say, "No." He says, "So you're just like regular black, huh?" Sadly, I say, "Yeah, funny, but since then I wanted to swallow every Rosetta Stone my stomach could hold because I really want to help them. They still got flavor, y'all. America's melting pot keeps its seasoning in ESOL classes. And if students are somehow dumb because they struggle with English, then Ludwig van Beethoven is a blibbering idiot. Place dunce hats on Mother Teresa and Gandhi. Does this make sense to you? A million questions interrupt conversations with myself like Mr. Baseball. Why is it called the World Series when you never leave home base? Newsflash, the world is more than New York and LA. Florida and Chicago, will we ever see clearly across the prime meridian, transcend oceans and embrace diversity when she cries at our doorstep, abandoned with no blankets? What happens when you mix Spanish, French, Creole, Vietnamese, and Russian-speaking students in a classroom, two bilingual teachers, and give assignments in English? How do you assess them? I'm not mad, just never seen this shade of gray before.
Sean Welcome's performance was meant to set the tone and ground the discussion in lived experiences. What followed was our conversation from Engage in the Community, Growth, Development, and Belonging. Central Florida is one of the fastest growing regions in the country. The latest U.S. Census data shows Orlando's population jumped 2.7% last year. That outpaces the statewide growth rate of 2%. All right, that's a number. It doesn't sound that huge at first. But among the largest metro areas in the country, Orlando is growing the fastest. Here's another way to look at it. The Orlando metro area added about 1,500 new residents every single week, 1,500 people every week. That growth is reshaping our neighborhoods, our infrastructure, even how we answer the question, what makes Central Florida feel like home or not? Tonight is not a debate, it's a chance to listen to each other and reflect on the human side of growth, who feels welcome, who feels left out, and how we build a community where everyone belongs. We do know from national research that this idea of belonging is more than just a feel-good concept. It actually can predict health, stress, civic participation, and even trust in democracy. There's a national survey that studies the connections between belonging and critical life outcomes. It's called the Belonging Barometer. The newest Belonging Barometer shows something important. About 75% of Americans say they don't feel a strong sense of belonging in their local community. That's the level that we're talking about tonight, that neighborhood growth and identity and where those all collide, and that's what we're going to get into. So we've assembled a panel for you tonight. I'm very excited to hear from. We have Owen Beitsch directly next to me, Senior Director at GAI Consultants, an engineering planning and consulting firm, and a founding member of the Orlando Neighborhood Improvement Corporation. He's a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners and faculty member in UCF's Urban Planning Program. Thank you, Owen. Next to him, David Baer. He is an attorney and advocate for rural and natural land preservation. He is president of the nonprofit Save Rural Seminole. Cecilia Nguyen owns Tien Hung Jewelry located inside the Mills Market, a longtime staple of the Mills 50 community. Thank you three for being here tonight. To start with you, David, describe the feeling that you get when you picture home and you just have that sense of belonging. I know that you were born in Winter Springs, you went to college in Maine, Florida State for law school, back in Seminole County, raising 3 kids. So what is it about Central Florida that makes it feel like home for you and your family?
So it's an interesting question, and I think built into the question is that this is an inherently subjective topic. So what makes a place home for me is very different than what makes home for anybody else. Some people, home really has nothing to do with geography. They might move every year. That doesn't mean they don't have a home. It just means home is something different for them than it is for me. So for me, and I think my family, my kids are young, so they're still figuring it out. Part of home has to do with a geographic-based community. Okay. And so we live in Winter Springs in Seminole County, and they play on sports and do activities and stuff like that. And so part of our home is necessarily their friends and their friends' families that live around us because we're in community-based activities, sports and arts and stuff like that. And also part of home is where our friends live in that same regard. But it's also the activities that we find fulfilling and valuable. And so you mentioned before, what do I do in an advocacy world? It's conservation advocacy. And so why is that? Because part of what makes Central Florida home to me is the ability to go out and hike on the trails, the ability to have green space that we go to. And so for me, that's a part of home and this being home, but it's I want to clarify, a non-judgmental way that other people have different types of home, but that's a part of our home, my home, and why this is my home.
Cecilia, your family built a home and community in Mills 50. That is one of Orlando's oldest neighborhoods. Can you talk to me about this sense of belonging? And I'm curious, has it always been there? Is it something that's evolved over time with your family?
It definitely has evolved tremendously. I am one of 7 children in my family. My father was part of the Vietnam War, fighting alongside with the American soldiers, and had a family that sponsored him when he came over here. It took him 9 years to sponsor my mom and sisters, my 4 sisters, to come over here. And my brothers actually had to flee on a boat to get to Thailand in order to meet and reunite with my family here. So home was a different start for our family. I was born the year after them reuniting, so I am the love child of meeting again. So I was the only one in my family that was born here in Central Florida. Home started and looked very different. It was a crowded home. We started in East Orlando, actually right in this area here, Dean Road. That was my childhood home. Where we are now, we grew up with all of our businesses because a lot of my siblings came over later in their life, so they didn't really, school was not an option, so it's business was first. So a lot of them opened up restaurants, tailor shops, a lot of more skilled things on Colonial and Mills. And my parents started a small jewelry store inside of a Oriental market at that time, and that's how we started at Mills 50 back in the 90s. So it was 1998 that my father started the jewelry store.
Wow. And Owen, you told me it was a moment for you. Can you share that moment?
Yeah, the moment for me, I had gone to graduate school here. I moved away, tired of the heat. And said that was a fun experience for graduate school. It's time to go somewhere else and do something else. I was gone maybe 6 months when I was recruited by an accounting firm to come back to Florida, specifically to Orlando. My first sense of community in Orlando was attending a meeting with a group of clients after I had been here maybe 6 weeks. and there was a group of at least a dozen people in this room, and literally none of them were from Orlando. And that's when I realized the thing that connected people for me professionally was what they were going to be doing in the future, not what they had done in the past. And because for the most part, this group of individuals was starting on a new pathway. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. Is so for me, the watershed moment was looking ahead and seeing in this room a group of very diversified people where they were not defined by history. They were defined only by what they could contribute to the community from that point forward. And I think that has been a lot of Orlando's past, part of its legacy, and will continue to be our legacy going forward as we continue to grow.
So, Owen, in the beginning, I mentioned just some numbers, a few percentages, which it can be easy to just hear them and not have it register. Before we get into how growth is changing communities, can you give us the context about just that extraordinary pace of growth that is happening in Central Florida and just what we need to understand about how that scale is shaping the feeling of home in Central Florida?
Yeah, there is some context to the growth conversation that we need to have. I mean, we all have a visceral or qualitative, a subjective sense of what growth means, and that's probably respected by all the different comments that have been posted. Sharon talked about some numbers. Let's put some boundaries on those numbers. The specifics that I shared with Sharon before we met tonight were these, that from 1980 through today, about half the built environment was constructed. So fundamentally, a house on either side of you, or a business, a hotel, whatever it is, didn't exist until 1980. So we literally have changed the physical nature of the environment, the built environment in which we function. In 1980, there were about 14 million people in the state of Texas, which in 1980 was then the fourth largest state in the country. Since 1980, we have added 14 million people to the state of Florida. So in effect, we have absorbed the state of Texas in about 45 years. I want you to ponder that for a moment. We've also eclipsed and more than absorbed the state of Pennsylvania, which has a population of about 13 million people. We passed that number probably 2 or 3 years ago. So literally in a span of 45 years, we've absorbed the equivalent of 2 states. And the point that I think is important here is not only the enormity of the numbers, I think they're huge by anybody's reference, is those states. Take Pennsylvania, for example. Pennsylvania, in order to get to a population of 13 million, had almost 250 years to get there. And so for 250 years, the state has been thinking about its investment, its resources, and its funding allocations to provide for that population. Texas became a state around 1850. So a similar situation in Texas. So Texas has had 150 years to plan for its growth in that century and a half. So Florida's had 40 years. So when you think about those challenges, it's difficult or not actually frightening to think about what it may take to manage that. And at the same time, housing is an issue that I think no matter where we live, we're cognizant of it. And homes and the building of homes are probably the thing that we see as the most evident measure of growth, right? A new home, a new subdivision. Specific to that, Florida, despite its growth, actually lags the country in terms of the housing that's being delivered to the marketplace. So we are not, despite what we see around us, providing enough housing for the people that are choosing to live here. And about half of that decision to move here is based on migration patterns. And I'm not sure what the trajectory of that will be over the next decade, certainly for the next 25 years. But at least today, a snapshot says that we are woefully, frighteningly underdeveloped in terms of being able to accommodate the population that we have. So that suggests a lot of different issues.
No, I appreciate just the visual of that, of thinking of Florida absorbing Texas and trying to figure out how to manage that kind of growth that happened in 40 years. You brought up a lot of stuff I want to get into a little bit deeper. So that belonging barometer I mentioned in the beginning, it shows that belonging drops significantly when people don't feel like they can influence what's changing around them, and all that growth just triggers this loss of agency. Cecilia, how has the cultural or economic landscape changed in Mills 50 with all this development we're talking about?
So what I started saying earlier is that my parents started that, but fast forward to now, our family and family-owned businesses is over 40 plus all around Central Florida. And just the change of let me just microscope it to Mills Market, which is the grocery market that the jewelry store was in. Out of necessity at the time, they said they wanted to sell, and then we switched the market over to what is now like a food hall. Just that changed the entire area. And not only that, the social media aspect of that also turned it into just putting it on the map of when you go to Orlando, it's not just theme parks anymore, which was something. And now even National Geographic wrote about Mills 50 being as something that that is the most interesting part of the city. So it's something that I never thought that this would happen, but I think it's the community, it's just how diversified we are and the openness to it and the growth of it that just became something that I would never even dream of. I think that it's a big part of the area and our growing city.
We're speaking with Owen Beich, David Baer, and Cecilia Nguyen during our Engage in the Community Growth, Development, and Belonging event. Next, what home means from a planning perspective, the systems and connections that are designed to make Central Florida feel like it belongs to everyone. Subscribe to the Engage podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode.
The Wrap is a podcast from Central Florida Public Media, curating the top Central Florida news stories and in-depth reporting each week. Join me, Brendan Byrne, as I bring you news headlines, deep reporting dives, and insightful conversations from the news team. A new episode of The Wrap every Friday morning. Get it wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. This episode, we're inviting you to listen, reflect, and think about what it means to belong in a growing community. We continue our conversation with Owen Beich, a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners and faculty member in UCF's urban planning program, attorney David Baer, president of the nonprofit Save Rural Seminole, and Cecilia Nguyen, owner of Tien Hung Jewelry in Orlando's Mills 50 community. We continue our conversation from our Engage in the Community Growth, Development, and Belonging live event held last week. Local communities knowing what's best for them in terms of managing growth versus those policymakers on the state level. And just some of the policies, like you had brought up housing earlier, and I want to know from you, Owen, is there kind of a measurement? Is there a way that perceptions and opinions about these issues, about housing insecurity or homelessness, does that guide the decision-making ahead when it comes to what planners are doing?
Well, I think we're all here because we really care about our communities, right? I mean, I think that's a common thread that's probably evident in everybody's comments and their mere attendance at this meeting. The reality is we respond to a lot of short-term conditions. That's a natural human behavior. We don't think long-term on a trajectory. And there's a big difference between a momentary event and something that has consequential institutional impact. Our community should be looking to these much longer term conditions. And I could tell from some of these comments that perhaps at least some attending don't think that we necessarily do that. A lot of money and effort is spent in Florida compared to other states to try to address these issues. Whatever good or bad you see in that, Florida has been, along with the home rule powers, has been a leader in the initiatives to try to deal with some of the problems we have. However, somewhere along the way, the difference in short-term needs, which is largely a political issue, versus longer-term needs, which is a social and cultural set of issues, we're slipping away from that. And how we deal with these longer-term concerns is far different than we need to deal with a short-term event. And hopefully we'll all be mindful of that as we think about our lives and our places in our community.
Cecilia, I think your family has a unique perspective of not just thinking short term. You've been in this community for, I guess, literally generations and decades. I'm wondering, how do you continue to build that connection as these communities change?
Honestly, we are just doing it day by day. We are learning as we're going, and the trends have changed dramatically since I first helped my parents 20 years ago and now. And the one thing that we have been working towards currently right now is bridging a lot of the gaps of giving back. And it's not just a business of, okay, like we see the community support. We see that people are walking through the doors and all of that. But I think our goal right now is learning to give back. We have something called Meals 50, where we pick different nonprofit organizations to give back meals. And we're trying to make it more of like a collective, because we have a lot of friends in the community that have other businesses and restaurants in the area, and we all work together. I love how Orlando has this feeling of just belonging and just like a friendship instead of like competitiveness. So we work alongside with all of our other chefs and other business owners. Surprisingly, like COVID was one of the things that brought us all together, because it was such a time of like uncertainty. Everybody closed. We all started texting each other like, what are you guys doing? What's working for you? Or, it was like a scary time, but it brought us so close because we started sharing ideas and figuring out what would work. And I feel like adapting to change quickly and effectively to just be better every single day. And that's the next step for us, is to find ways to make it more not just a business, but to involve the community, to give back and grow in that sense, to be stronger together and just not of our own little circle, but just like to spread it out in that way and to bring awareness. That's mainly our point right now.
It sounds like it's a very intentional thing for you to build that belonging. So I don't want to present all this growth as only negative. A lot of people would say that it's a sense of pride for them. All the growth is happening in Florida. Look at all the people that are moving here. Everyone wants to be here, and we get to be here, and they just keep coming. So my question isn't whether it's good or bad. I want to learn how it affects the way just kind of your identity connects to home. What's disappearing for you guys, and what still gives you pride? Like, David, what do you celebrate in Central Florida, and what do you miss?
I think the answer to that is a dynamic one in our day and age.
Okay.
So, everybody's got a phone, and they're driving around, and they're multitasking with the phone. They're at dinner, and they're looking at the phone, or doing something, not interacting with the people next to them. And so, I think the answer to your question is inherently tied up with how do we as a community, this has nothing to do with really Central Florida, maintain a connection, with our neighbors, rather than just retreating to our own insular house in the digital world. So ideally, how do you deal with that? By proactively making sure you're part of community networks, whether that's things that you share with people. I have young kids, they're in sports, so we're in sports teams. You're making sure those sports teams are community-based, rather than just like, some random assortment of people think they're really good at something. So that has a value because then you build a community-based group or a Rotary Club, or there's a million different types of clubs and organizations. But purposely being a part of those, and that includes whether you've lived here for 30 years or you just moved here. I think that's a part of the answer to that.
Cecilia, where is the beauty for you and where is the loss?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like a double-edged sword for me. The phone is something that's actually making us reach further, much further than what I could ever imagine. But then at the same time, yes, we're losing that connectiveness. So I feel like, once again, it's physically being somewhere and mentally, like if you are physically like being out and about and part of community events. We recently opened up a salon in Lake Ivanhoe, and there's something about that Main Street community that I always joke with, and I'm like, I'm part of Mills too, but I'm gonna be honest, Mills is like, we're like cousins. Like everyone in Mills, like we're nice to each other. We'll say hi to everyone's business, but there's something about Ivanhoe. They are so tight knit and close, and it feels like a sibling. And that's something that I recently have learned. Like, yes, we're using social media and we're on our phones to outreach further. But I love what he was saying is that like we're doing these community events that we had Jingle Eve, for example, last month. Thousands and thousands of people, and it's November, and it wasn't Thanksgiving yet. It was the week of Thanksgiving, but we were celebrating Christmas and pretending like, you know, it's Christmas already. But it brought thousands and thousands of people, and I love that.
Can I add something to that, please? I think the one thing that's evident from the maps and the strings and the comments is we have a certain affinity for individual neighborhoods, right? What's the importance of neighborhood? It's probably the smallest unit other than our house and our street. And Orlando and the communities surrounding it are nothing more than a collection of different neighborhoods. And the opportunity to engage and interact really begins at the neighborhood, and being, you know, more interactive with your neighbors, who then become your friends, or in some cases, maybe people you want to not have as friends. But you define your life and your life experiences principally based on some notion of how you define your neighborhood, and then your town, perhaps then your county, and then your region. And how we are able to participate is somewhat based on our familiarity with those neighborhoods. The one thing that I think hasn't changed is that even the newest areas of Orlando, as subdivisions are planned, you know, there is an attempt even in these newest communities to anchor them with the notion of a centralized gathering place that might be called a town center, it might be a recreation center, it might be a golf course. But the fact is, there's something there to anchor it, to give it the sense of a traditional community where people can interact. So even though we've changed and evolved and people are coming here by leaps and bounds, we still gravitate to some familiarity in our social structure. And I think that's important. And we can affect that social structure because it's not that far away from us if we think about our neighborhoods.
You talked about city centers, and I think that's very interesting in relation to what I see a lot now, which is purposeful city planning and growth. And you know, for many years, Central Florida, in a lot of places, they just organically sprawled out without really much purposeful planning to it. And you see that, you know, the relics of that in many of our cities here in Central Florida. And you see them reverse engineering a lot of these town centers, Winter Springs where I live, or Oviedo, and it takes purposefulness to and investment to re-engineer them, or to ideally engineer them to start with. And my point really there is that there's a difference between just letting the community grow however the heck developers think they can maximize profits, with purposely planning how our communities are going to grow. And purposely planning how they grow, whether it's in relation to rural topics that I deal with a lot, or town centers, takes political will and looking at the long term, not the short term myopic, well, how do I save 1% on our budget next year, do things the cheapest. The short term cheapest is not necessarily, and oftentimes is the opposite of the long term best planning. And if we care about our communities long term, we should be thinking about is what is the long term best planning, not how do we make the most short term politically expedient decision.
So I want to talk to you guys about if there are some resources that are in danger. Let me give you an example. Our environment reporter here just did a story about regional water supply and a plan that identifies reclaimed water as an alternative water source for Central Florida to avoid running out of water by 2045. To be clear, no utilities here are doing this, treating and distributing recycled wastewater, but I want to know, are there resources like that groundwater that are reaching a breaking point in Central Florida? Maybe, Owen, can you start us with just what systems, the water, the roads, zoning, whatever it is, what's most stretched and at risk?
I think all of them require money and attention. So that's a common denominator. Roads are, we're struggling to find alternatives for mobility. That's expensive. Water is in somewhat limited supply. I'm sure none of us are very, very happy with their water bill. I've never spoken to anyone that believes that they are charged fairly for their
I don't love
water.
any of my bills, though, to be fair.
Yeah, so, but we underpay for water that we use, just like we underpay for the transportation that we desire. The topic we were discussing before was property taxes. Okay, I don't have kids. And I've never resented the fact that at least half of my property tax bill is associated with education. Why? Because it's a social imperative to improve the quality of the knowledge and the students that are going to be our future leaders tomorrow. That's a visceral reaction. The reality is I write the check every year and I would like to pay less, whether it's taxes or water or roads. We all have to decide what our quality of life is worth. Roads are not only expensive, they take up space. Water can be manufactured out of salt water. We have the technology to produce enough water. We don't have the technology to produce it as cheaply as we now use it or consume it. So, most of the things that we have here are choices that are, while they appear to be social and cultural, they're largely economic. And there's an individual set of values attached to each of those. And some of those individual values, by the way, also affect where we choose to live. It's not only because a house is particularly expensive or inexpensive, that may be the ultimate deciding point. But when we buy a house, we're buying a neighborhood, we're buying a bundle of services, we're buying electrical service, we're buying water service, we're buying roads. That's part of our house price. And we don't think about our neighborhood and our home as conveying that type of package of goods.
I would love to hear from you as well, Cecilia. Are there systems that feel just the most stretched, that you're most concerned about?
On my side of it, what I see as like a daily thing in our establishments is just the waste of good water. And I feel that it's something that we get so much of and so easily of right now that it does give me a fear of the future, because I'm not thinking, I have 3 kids also, and I'm not thinking of my kids, but it's also the many, many generations to come. And I always think about it because it's like when you go to a restaurant and the server brings your check, it's known to them, fill their waters, because they're about to leave and you don't want them to think that you didn't take care of them. They're filling waters knowing that we're about to leave. That's a waste, right? And I think it's like having people think differently, to be more aware, or to plan to have a future of how do we learn to recycle? How do we bring it into the social light for making people feel like, oh no, if you don't want anymore, please tell me, and it's not seen as like you didn't take care of me. Yeah. So whenever I get the check, I'm like, oh no, don't worry, I'm fine, thank you. And I make it a point, like, don't worry about it. I understand what you're doing right now, but don't, because you're wasting a cup of water to sit there and you're going to throw it out. So I think there has to be like a shift in perception to understand more of just, let's be real. Let's not do things to do things or do things just for money.
You know, one of the most infuriating things to me is you're driving down the boulevard and there's municipal property, landscaped area in the middle. And I mean, it's fine to have irrigation on that. It's raining. Mm-hmm. And the county irrigation system or the city irrigation system is running, or it's got a broken sprinkler head. Mm-hmm. What are we doing? We're not even taking the basic steps that are sitting right in front of us to protect our water supply.
I do want us to get the audience involved before we run out of time. Before I do, quick question for all three of you. We've talked about Central Florida feeling like home. What are the ramifications when people physically live in Central Florida, but Cecilia, they don't ever really feel like it's home? They don't have that emotional or cultural connection. What do we lose? What are the ramifications?
I just feel that like it's hard to feel like home anywhere if you're not making it home. I feel like just being part of the community and outreaching or just starting small within where you live, like what he was saying before, within your community, and then outreaching further and further. I definitely know that my family didn't feel like this was home 30 years ago. Yeah. But does it feel like, even Mills 50, I was shy and embarrassed when people asked, where's your family store? I'm like, it's like where all the Asian markets are at. It's like Mills and Colonial, and it was like a quiet little, that's just where we are. But now it's like proudly saying Mills and Colonial. Yeah. Everybody, you'll know where that is. Like, and I feel that the community has helped us to be that. And being a minority at the time back then, I remember my family always saying, like, you have to reach out more. You have to do more. There's always that sense of, like, it's never enough. I can actually say the past 2 years, being more open to the community, being like, hey, this is our culture, come check it out. And putting what we know or what our true identity is out there, and then everyone accepting it the way that it is, that actually just sunk in. And then home for me ended up being home for everyone around us, and now just putting that on the map. And so that feeling of home, it's hard. My family and I just felt that now of not having to prove ourselves as much as all the past years.
I think there's a public interest imperative of facilitating people feeling like they're a part of a home, because if they feel like they're a part of the community, they pour more into it. Mm-hmm. And so as a community, if we want to facilitate our community helping ourselves, it's imperative that we do what we can to help people feel like they are connected to and live in this community, because that will have a positive feedback loop on more giving and self-help.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Coming up, how would you finish this sentence? To build belonging in a growing community, we must. Our panelists and audience weigh in with their insights on what action it will take to make a community feel like home. Engage on Central Florida Public Media is available on demand anytime at cfpublic.org.
There's a lot going on in space, from efforts to land astronauts on the moon
and liftoff of Artemis 1
to answering the age-old question, are we alone in the universe?
Wouldn't you want to know if there was life on another planet?
Are We There Yet? Explores space exploration every Tuesday at 6:30 here on Central Florida Public Media.
You're listening to Engage on Central Florida Public Media. I'm Sharon Stone. We close by bringing the conversation full circle with our panelists and audience, reflecting on what it takes to build belonging in a rapidly growing region and what it means to move forward together. Owen Beitsch is a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners and faculty member in UCF's Urban Planning Program. Attorney David Baer is president of the nonprofit Save Rural Seminole, and Cecilia Nguyen is owner of Tien Hung Jewelry in Orlando's Mills 50 community. Now, I would like to bring the audience into the conversation at this point, anyone who's comfortable. We'll put the question to the panelists first to buy you time. Here's a question I'm going to ask each of you. I'm just going to go down the line. Complete this thought in a sentence. To build belonging in a growing community, we must, we'll start with you, Owen. To build belonging in a growing community, we must what?
I think we must preserve our history. And even though it's a relatively short history, I was sharing earlier that she's moving to Ivanhoe. There are now 4 generations of businesses on Ivanhoe, which means that fundamentally what was there when I moved here is very different from what's here today. The same with the Mills District. What's there today is very different than when I moved here, and it's changing again, which is, so preserving our history, creating that continuity, preserving that legacy, I think is important.
To build belonging in a growing community, we must what, David?
I think invest in it. And invest does not just mean money, but individuals have to invest their time and their energy and their talents, because these good outcomes don't happen on accident. They happen because we invest into them.
And last but not least, to build belonging in a growing community, we must
give back. That's exactly what we're trying to do right now. As soon as we felt the love and the home and the community feeling, the first thing we thought of is how do we give back, because we are thankful for that. And we want to continually grow Orlando and Central Florida, and that's how we would show our thankfulness, is to give back.
Is there anyone willing to share the answer to that? To build belonging in a growing community, we must. We're coming around with a microphone.
Hi. I think we must share and listen and know how to talk to people. I think that that's a real struggle right now. Something that David said and Cecilia piggybacked on is we need to know why people feel like they can't engage. Just for reference, I'm a mental health counselor, so I hear nonstop that people are like, I feel helpless, I don't know what to do. And it's like there are opportunities, but people don't know how to access them. And sometimes people are nervous to say, where do I feel comfortable fitting in and engaging with the community? So I think we need to have more conversations about the opportunities that there are and make people feel comfortable to engage in those spaces.
I'm going to say we need to support the building of the institutions that those people need. So many times we've needed a mosque half a mile up the road from a church, but the neighbors all come out up in arms saying, we can't have these people in our neighborhood. I've been in those zoning hearings, and it's shot down by our leadership and by the neighbors. And that really breaks my heart. This is our community, but we can't worship because of the racism and the hate that exists. So I think it's easy to say that we want to have belonging, but when we need you to show up for us so we can have our institutions and feel like we can do the things we need, until that happens, I think it's all talk.
We need affordable housing options. I went to university here for my undergraduate, my graduate, my dear friends that are professors, school teachers, and they have all left Orlando because they purely cannot live in this area. My rent has literally doubled in the last 10 years in this area, from $1,100 for a 4-tool with a pool, wonderful collegiate experience, to I'm paying almost $2,400 for a 2-1. We are seeing everyone go to Ocoee, Apopka, these outside areas, Haines City. I've had a friend move to recently. These are educated, smart people that truly cannot afford to stay in this area, and we love it. We're educated people, and we can't live here. It's extremely disappointing that we don't feel that support.
Anyone else wants to answer or ask a question to our panelists as well?
I would like to piggyback on the share in order to grow the community. But sharing as a culinarian and speaking to fabulous Mills Market folks that brought this, what they have done is they have shared part of their culture through cuisine, which is what got me into culinary in the first place. Everybody eats, but if you share yourself through food, which leads to conversation, which leads to education, which then leads to acceptance and growth and acceptance of people of any faith, any culture, because everybody eats and most people's food is really, really good. And being able to share joyously and expressively through not just conversation, but also through some crispy pork. Just saying.
Hi, I think great minds think alike. I concur with what was just said. To build that connection that we want on the individual level, to be open and curious, to be curious about other people. Ask them questions about their music, their food, their faith, their art, their culture. You will grow as a human being, and as we do that, so does our community.
Hello. I think we need to think about us, and be less individual to be able to create that sense of belonging. It takes a village to create a village, and we all together have to make it. So as a community, and this is kind of a little bit of criticism as an immigrant, Americans tend to be very I and work in silos versus other communities that are older, a little more established, thinks about we. It's our community, our neighborhood, our roots. So we need to start thinking about we, be more welcoming, also a little bit more resilience and flexible. If you're thinking about that growth, there's a lot of red tape that it needs to be cut to be able to allow that flexibility, a sense of belonging. So going back to your concept of grass, we are required by code to have it. So, it's one of those things that a little bit of less red tape.
When you asked the question about what home means, I wrote home is connection, solicitude, care, responsibility, and active citizenship, which leads to belonging, generosity, and security. And so we need to engage more people, and that's part of belonging, opening it up wide so people can be involved. And that's not as spectators, but people that will also actually be listened to and where their voices really matter.
Well, I do appreciate all of you and everyone engaging with us tonight. It's just a reminder that growth is about more than just buildings. It's about the place, the belonging, and the people. Thank you to our panel for bringing your expertise and your experience. Owen Beitsch, David Baer, Cecilia Nguyen. And we're working on our next Engage in the Community event, Arts as Renewal, inviting us to examine the challenges facing our creative ecosystem and how they are transforming the arts in Central Florida. That's going to be coming up in April. More details to come. So again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to the panel and all the staff who helped put on tonight's Engage in the Community event. Thank you.
A special thank you to our Community Collaboration Director, Rebecca Fernandez, who played a huge role in making the Engage in the Community event possible. That is all for today's edition of Engage. One last thing before we go, I want to hear from you. With Affordable Care Act subsidies set to expire at the end of the month and higher health insurance costs on the way, Engage is working on a new episode exploring what it actually means for people's lives. If you relied on the subsidies or have concerns about what comes next, share your story with us. Send an email to engage@cfpublic.org or send us a talkback on the free Central Florida Public Media app. I'm Sharon Stone. Thank you for the company. All Things Considered is coming up following NPR News.